Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today is a very good episode to kick this week off because we have to Mr. Brian Mort here. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Andrew. That's a very kind introduction. And many years since we worked together at SAP, I always remember marveling at your supply chain expertise, wowing the board of a big engineering company up north somewhere. It was near Stephenson's Rocket, but I thought, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I remember that. That was quite an amazing meeting. That wasn't it? We were actually in the boardroom of GEC.
That's right.
It was who was the guy that ran it? And yeah, I remember we were actually in the boardroom with all those managing directors, and literally it was actually the same location where Stephenson's Rocket was built. I mean, it's like amazing when you think about it. Some kind of just outside Manchester, wasn't it? I think
it was, and thank goodness you were there because you completely wowed them with your sales and distribution and material management and warehousing and days of inventory knowledge. So I felt like it was a great lesson for me that day in really understanding your customer. So that was my last memory of when we worked together. So
was it?
Yeah.
Wow, that's when I had shorts on and my hair was brown. See,
that's
a few years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
Only last week.
You've not aged today.
Yeah. You're such a smooth talker. No, great to have you on the show because I know that we're going to have a great conversation today because I know that some of the stuff that you've done since our heady days of in the 90s when we had that kind of what was it called, the biggest IT con in the history of the universe. You know, when you get to year 2000, everything's going to blow up. Yeah, incredible, isn't it?
Obviously, it was a compelling event, wasn't it? And joining SAP was quite the sublime moment, really. I can remember I'd been working for Oracle, and we were looking over the garden fence, thinking, "Who are these guys from SAP? They keep winning all of the supply chain deals, and the apps seem to work between finance and manufacturing and distribution. Who are these guys?" It was like one of those movies, where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where the posse goes one way and the horses go the other, and then they come back to the same trail. But I mean, joining SAP was a complete privilege, of course, in the early 90s, as Hasso gave us a story that he didn't have 4 concurrent users going into the Hanover Fair in 1993, and they worked overnight like a Formula One team and had it working on the first day. And the rest is history, really. Customers going from mainframe into client server, and for us to be part of that decade of amazing growth was quite something. It also really attracted some of the best talent we've ever worked with, coming together, sales and pre-sales and marketeers and consultants. It was one of those joyous periods in technology where it wasn't scattered to the winds. You worked for IBM or Oracle or SAP, and it was a bit like being invited to join a private club. You couldn't apply. You had to be pointed the finger at to say, let's go and get this guy. So it was a brilliant time.
I mean, on that, that's a really good point to actually raise. Actually, I think the peer level, if you go join an organization and the peer level is like, you have to run to keep up. Yeah.
Yes.
Because they're all such high performers. I think it was very, very interesting. I mean, I joined from GE. I joined from a customer, and I remember having an exit interview from GE with the CEO, Mike Zafarowski. He said, "Oh, there's no future at SAP." This is like 1996, I think it was. That's like, Jesus, that's quite a few years ago. It's, no future. And then I joined SAP and I was going, holy moly, this is like a different level. You're like walking down the corridor, and remember Kevin Gibson, our ex-managing director, goes, "What are you doing now?" So I'm just preparing a proposal. He says, "Okay, I've got the board of Unilever in here. Can you come in here in 15 minutes and present to them about this topic?" I mean, it's just like mental when you think about it.
Yeah, there was a humble swagger about SAP. It was a different culture to Oracle. who also I hold very dearly. Many of my friends come from both organizations. So coming from this highly aggressive American culture to a more thoughtful but extremely capable culture of a German software company, it's still the best enterprise software, really, in terms of application excellence that I've ever seen. And like you say, joining the company, I think I was employee number 37 from memory, and you know, joining as a sales guy at the time in accounts which were brand new, you know, greenfield sites. I was given the choice: did I want to go into petroleum, supply chain type areas where SAP were very strong, or did I want to hand pick 4 accounts? And so I did my homework. I sat there and I said to Danny Crosby, who was my boss, I picked the 4 accounts. And he said, well, why did you pick those? You know, and I'd done all the study of number of sales and distribution centers and where the complexities were. So it was a tremendous place to be because you had the best of everything. Even though it felt like a startup at the time. It went from 30 odd employees in the square at IBM to thousands of employees in the UK alone. And I think the UK had that period where it was probably the most contributing operating unit of any. So Petra, the then MD before Kevin, you know, had a fabulous hand in that, and then Kevin took over, of course. So these people we hold with great reverence, and they put a smile on our face as we remember some of the best people we've ever worked with. But you know, it also goes back to the fact that they were ready. They were like a fine bottle of wine. They were ready to perform on the center stage because they'd been trained by Xerox and Olivetti and IBM. They'd worked for other software companies. And I think the difference between then and now, Andrew, is that companies rarely put the investment into their expertise anymore. You know, they hire people for positions, but these people haven't had or enjoyed the same training as we had, which in my case was a Xerox sales training, and you weren't allowed to speak to a customer for a year until you passed every particular training block that you had to go through, and then you went out as a cadet, and then you got, you know, your small patch in the middle of London, and you get a street in SE1, and so on, and so you raised the scale. And even going to Oracle, I think I had tier 3 pharmaceutical accounts, so I was running up and down the country from Scotland to Sandwich, you know, doing small deals. And then once you win your first President's Club, you get a better territory, and so on, and it goes from there.
It's like a journey, isn't it? It's like a progression, but they kind of like
very much so.
They step you through it. They step you through it.
Yeah,
no, it's an interesting point. Because I mean, I think you raised that interesting point about, you know, the sales training, especially from places like Xerox and obviously IBM and those kind of, I suppose, classic sales schools. You know, what for all these kind of, you know, this big migration into tech startups these days. You know, what of the people that are either in, you know, are founders or in commercial positions? What's their background? You know, have they been through those hard yards? How do they learn the tacit skills and the strategic skills that was kind of mandated, really, wasn't it? It was kind of like it was boot camped into you when you were there. It wasn't really an option. It was like thou shalt do it. So it's fascinating.
There's a different DNA, of course, to most founders and entrepreneurs that build an engineering product and have the excellence of, you know, the DevOps and the architecture and everything. And then once they've scaled and got their first client or their first round of capital, they've then got to scale the company beyond their home geography, you know, wherever they start from, whether it's London or Munich or wherever. And that's where the complexity starts, because they're hiring people that are not in the same mold of DNA as themselves. So It's when you've got to start looking at how do you scale a business? How do you have that organizational design? Who are the kind of first line managers that are going to help you to scale a company, whether it's from R&D through marketing, through business development, sales, and so on and so forth. So that's where founders sometimes reach their glass ceiling, and I've seen it so many times. The really good ones understand what they're really good at, and they are very ambassadorial and wonderful at the way they articulate the message. But when you scale a company beyond, that first 10 or 20 or 30 million, and you go beyond your first country, you need to start thinking about how to scale with the experts in their particular domain.
And in your experience, I know you've worked in product companies, and you've also done stints in services companies as well. Have you any kind of comments around that? Is it similar? Or
well, it's a different side of the theatre curtain. Obviously, on the software side, you're selling IP, and you're selling, a vertical or a functional process to solve a company's issues. When you're a service company, you're looking to help transform that business, whether it's through human transition or whether it's through the technology delivery side. So the big firms and the mid-sized firms are really there to help take the company from its legacy through to its future. And we're seeing incredible change right now between AI and agentic software versus the big SaaS or on-premise products that we sold in the 90s and the early 2000s. So we're going to see a huge change, I think, Andrew, in the way that companies deliver. I think the big message will be the board. How do they really grapple this and understand how to look at software and AI, generally speaking, from their current technology stack all the way through to how do they add value? I think 80% of corporations currently are using AI. Most of them, I think 60 or 70%, are saying there's no material benefit yet to that return on investment. Now, whether you're in a chatbot environment for a call center or you're in a marketing environment for retail, clearly, there's productivity gains in terms of speed. If you're a call center, you want to be able to serve us when we call up in a minute rather than 10 minutes as, the 15th person waiting online. And so, automation and AI really does drive speed and efficiency with a human as the supervisor. And that's very different from how we started out in software. I mean, I wasn't in the mainframe era. I was in the client server to start with, and then the cloud SaaS environments of the last 10 years. Now we're seeing the fragmentation of that, and how do you glue AI into your current systems? It's going to be really interesting to look at latency, sovereignty of data, who owns the data, the speed of service that you get, and of course then the risk and compliance and governance of that data as well. So we're seeing a titanic shift in technology over the next 2 or 3 years, which is very exciting, actually. When you've been through the several eras that we've seen, to see this new level of growth is going to be an amazing era for companies to take advantage, and also for new players to come into the market. The walled gardens of the old players may not survive. We write this in my current business. We advise vendors and private equity firms on the speed of change and the redundancy of old software products. They can be very, very sticky, of course, and have multi-year contracts, but will customers want to buy them in 3, 4, 5 years' time? And that's the big question, really. How will corporations consume technology and as a service rather than buying capital software and equipment to run it on-prem?
You went through a lot then. one of the points that really stuck with me though when you were saying was you said there's obviously a high level of organizations adopting AI or embracing AI, but they're not getting the ROI on it. Why are you saying that? Is it just being mismanaged, or is it just people not really still trying to work out how to get to the ROI? Is it kind of like, because it's quite complex, isn't it?
There's a lack of maturity.
Mm.
There's a lack of maturity in how the startups are going to grow and articulate their value. And then I think companies are looking at it from a departmental bolt-on exercise rather than a vertical function across their business. And so, like any other major transformational shift in the way that companies operate, it's got to be from the CEO and the C-suite, sponsoring it into their organization. If a company isn't tech savvy, then it's going to be at a complete disadvantage to its competition. And it comes from the very top, as we found in all of the major projects that were successful, where you've got the stamp of approval from the CFO, the CEO, the CIO, and architecture. The bigger the corporation, the more complex the labyrinth of sign-off against that. But it's still in the phase of let's experiment. We don't really understand it. The CEOs and leaders that I talk to don't really understand the benefits as yet. The first generation of automation was let's take a business process and automate that in a repetitive manner, use the robotics to do that. And that could be, loans, where it takes thousands of loans done by a robot in a day rather than 3 months by a team of humans. That's first generation. But when you take the intelligence of how does a robot then go from reactive to proactive? How does it make decisions? And where does a human come into that to be the supervisor is really the next level design for what was the generation to be called intelligent automation. But now we're seeing the agents come into that and be part of the network of working with humans. So it's going to be interesting. We looked at business process mapping and design way back at SAP. Do you remember the great big sheets? That was obviously automated with some great vendors that are out there today. And then you take that automation and then you say, right, we can automate this business process, whether it's order to cash or hard to retire. But then infusing the agents in there to do the work is the really tricky bit, because you've got legacy, you've got API links, and then you've got the access to the data. And there's a lot of walled gardens out there that I've alluded to, that who owns the actual data? Who's going to be able to access the data? Are you going to be locked into one vendor, or is it your data? This is going to be a very interesting year ahead as we see, a lot of bun fights as to, well, it's my data, I'm the customer, and then the vendor says, oh, hang on a minute, no, you're using my software system and it's not your data. So to get a clean end-to-end view of your data is going to be very interesting for corporations moving forward.
Yeah, I mean that first iteration of what you said about the kind of the automation piece, I presume that's what you're referring to, is what people traditionally called RPA, robotic process automation. Is that right? With like UiPath, and I think you were running Blue Prism, weren't you?
That's right.
Yeah. So that was kind of like getting more throughput. Is that right? So if you compare a human to a robot, you're getting more volume of throughput through a standard process. Was that the kind of the value equation?
Yeah, in essence, that's absolutely right. So you could take an insurer with claims, looking at the accuracy of a claim and how much throughput, humans supervising that, or you could take a bank with loan applications that they could have a peak at a particular time of year, perhaps after the festive period, where people want micro loans and there could be thousands of loans coming in, and humans can't process that many loans in a short period of time to be able to give the answers to retain the customer who might wander elsewhere if they don't get the answer in time. So a call center would be where you compress the average handling time. So, they've got Andrew's name and address, what he uses, what his tariffs are, when his expiry dates come up, so they can upsell and cross-sell, and they can look at your billing cycles or any areas of returns that you need to do. So all of these areas are well and truly practiced with the big corporations of the world, and so repetitive process, robotic process engineering was an amazing. It was the fastest enterprise class of software in terms of growth at the time, and Blue Prism were the founding fathers of that technology. It was a wonderful company.
And that was a UK company, so is that right?
It was a UK company, yes.
Yeah.
Two amazing entrepreneurs that came out of Barclays, one a data scientist and one a business analyst. And it took them, a few years to commercialize the business, but they grew, fivefold in 3-4 years. And even during the lockdown periods, did a huge amount of work to bring, millions back to, the way in which supply chains worked and kept, ongoing operations working during lockdown periods was tremendous. Working with, the National Health, allowing doctors and nurses to stay on the front line rather than do the admin was an incredible area of pride that the company took in serving its customers.
And I suppose is that what you would call managing? This phrase hyper growth. Is that was how we described that as a hyper growth experience?
It was a hyper growth company because originally it was just a bunch of Brits flying around the world, and of course, when you go to Munich or Stockholm or Dubai, people want local people on the ground in local languages, local support, and so on. So the company grew exponentially as a result of, we went to the board every seems like every month, probably every quarter, to open up a new entity, because you'd end up with 30 or 40 customers in the Nordics, and the cost to serve model was crazy if you were flying in from London.
Also in the early days, you were flying the whole UK team to all the different geos to
absolutely, yes.
Oh my God!
Yes.
Oh wow!
So we opened up all over the world as a result of that growth. Our customers drove that with us, So opening up in Europe, Middle East, Africa, Nordics, Japan, and so on was a wild ride of hyper growth, and the employee count grew 10x as well, because that then puts a huge strain on your infrastructure of supporting a business, with organizational design. You then need to really work very carefully on people's career maps and how to serve the customer. It's going from a 30-40 person business to 1,500 people in less than 3 years is quite a strain on, the way in which you operate legally, financially, and from an HR point of view as well. So incredible.
It also goes back to that kind of, I suppose, that thing we started off the episode about talent as well, is about, it's also how do you ensure you kind of keep hiring A players so that they, your organization structure builds in the right way. Was that something that was also quite challenging as well? Finding the people who actually could deal with that and have the mindset around, dealing with that kind of environment. Because that's what I found, when we worked together before, is it's not just about technical skills and the business skills, it's about the mindset as well, about having the right attitude, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, great people want to work for great companies with great stories, and it's funny how people form at the well when that happens. The Oracles, the SAPs, and certainly Blue Prism was that. It was an incredible journey to be able to attract some of the best talent in the world from all the geographies that we served. And we had a process for that in terms of hiring and the way in which we looked at applications and went through a process that was not only a candidate experience that was very solid for the individual, but also for us to be able to take on the best in class at everything that we were looking for. And as Larry Ellison once said, you know, if you've got a band of A players, then I can definitely beat an army of B players, and that is so true.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, did you apply the classic turkey shoot?
We did in some cases. I mean, it was always quite competitive. You know, get people to sing for their supper when it comes to coming in. You know, have they understood the company, the proposition? Have they done the research? Have they got the basic instincts to really learn? Do they have the belief system, the drive to really succeed in a fast-paced environment? And that's the kind of culture that you look to build in an organization like this. It's about the journey, it's about the collaboration and the team spirit, and it's about really celebrating success along the way. So it was old-fashioned in the sense that it instilled all of the things that we loved when we were growing up in software companies, with presidents' clubs and quarterly awards and CEO dinners. And it was a wonderful thing because it makes people feel really part of the journey, really motivated and excited to receive, you know, their little glass award to put on their cabinet.
I mean, I'll never forget my turkey shoot when I joined SAP UK. I don't know if you were actually in the audience that day. I know there was there was about 6 of you, and I remember the question that I was given: create a scenario where create a pitch to explain why this company would not buy SAP.
I had exactly the same, and I was working at Oracle at the time, and I said, I think you're asking me to trade guns with the Indians here, aren't you? This is extremely, you know, saucy to be asking me to do that. But anyway, we did it, and of course, it was great intel for SAP at the time.
No, it's kind of like it's like that contrarian, I suppose, challenge, isn't it? You know, it's like, how do you create that situation where they couldn't sell into that because they were pretty much selling into every industry sector. So yeah, it was something I'll always forget. You never kind of forget that situation. And then, you know, the people that were actually in the audience that were grilling you, like the following Monday when you join, or whatever, the following few weeks later, you know, you're actually sat peer to peer with them, then basically doing things. It was like, and then you get pulled into a turkey shoot as one of the audience then as well, you know. So it's kind of like what goes around comes around kind of thing. Interesting. No, thanks for sharing that stuff about Blue Prism. I always wondered what, you know, the way you articulated it was about, you know, improving throughput. And I think this thing about now with AI, you know, there's obviously a lot of boards and CEOs and, you know, leadership teams. You know, we've got to get into this AI thing. You know, we're gonna be left behind if we don't. But then the complexity comes about. Well, actually, how do we create this new operating model, and how do we validate it? Because the thing you were talking about there with the agents piece, which is like it's like 2025, like the year of agents. You know, then you're actually handing over to a system to make decisions for you and do the reasoning. Yeah. Which usually in a business process, you have those checkpoints where the human would make that intervention or make that decision. And now you're saying, okay, system, make your own decision and live by that, and then go on to the next part of the process. So, I mean, I know everybody's jumping into it. I was at a session in London last night, a technology session with a vendor that I'm not going to mention. And even they were, you know, they're in the data space, and they're bringing out their agent framework as well. Everybody's just going like agent crazy. It's like, if you're a buyer, you know, like when I was at Tesco, when I, you know, went back into industry after the SAP days, you know, it must be mind-boggling, you know, having to make a decision around which way do you go, because that point you said about, you know, who owns the data sovereignty, you know, what's proprietary, what's actually yours, all the legal ramifications of it. I think it's going to be, it's a lot of work to do. You got to tread carefully.
Well, it's a huge undertaking for corporations because the decision they have to make is, do we build on the foundations of our house, or do we pull the house down and build a new one? And of course, that's very expensive. But if you don't one day pull down an old house, then you're just going to be fitting out the new bathrooms and kitchens and so on. So the big question for companies now is, do we build on existing business processes, or do we, as some of the expert opinions out there, reimagine the way in which a business process works? And that's really difficult, that bit. You mentioned the vendors. The vendors have to also truly understand the business. Like the old Xerox sales training, we won't talk about our business until we fully understand yours, is the adage that I would recommend these companies really understand, because you can't talk about your bell and whistle and really get anything other than a glazed look from a CIO or a CTO or a CFO. So you have to really understand the persona of person you're dealing with and what their problems are and where they sit in an organization, and what their current problems are, whether it's a supply, a buffer, whether it's customer service, whatever the situation might be in their industry, is truly understanding their business to be able to apply your technology as a solution to it. And I don't see enough of that in the modern companies that are growing up, Andrew. And I think for the companies to really succeed, they need that engineering capability, the expertise of, we grew up with industry experts and pre-sales experts that didn't talk about technology. They talked about business. They talked about a day of inventory, and they understood a balance sheet, and they would talk about from warehouse to shelf. And that's what a customer wants to hear. And then how does automation help me improve on my current circumstances? And that's the way that technology companies should be trained to talk to industry. When you worked on customer side, you would want to listen to people that had done their homework about your role, how you had to enhance results for the business, whether it be improving perishables. Have we got enough strawberries sitting in Wimbledon branch for 2 weeks' time versus Chester branch? It's all these things, right? Because if they've got 10% of perishables and they're sending too many strawberries to Chester instead of Wimbledon, then the technology has to understand how to apply to that to save you, 10 million in your supply chain during the month of July, for instance.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I was I do so. I obviously the Tesco's got food and non-food, but I worked in retail services. So I worked in Tesco Bank, I worked in Tesco Mobile, Tesco Telecoms, ran that for 5 years. And I remember I did some customer research in Stretford, in the Tesco Metro in Stretford. I met the store manager. This one was at Tesco Bank, and he goes, Andrew, appreciate you coming to see me, but why the F UCK are we trying to promote ISAs in Stretford? Yeah. If you're in like, I don't know, if you're in like Bournemouth, yeah, you probably want to promote ISAs, yeah. But we need loans, we need credit cards here, not bloody ISAs, yeah. So that's that's kind of like an analogous thing with your strawberries example, yeah.
It's exactly right.
So it's like a wake up call.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean it's I mean I think when I was running Tesco Mobile, it's like Tesco Telecoms. It was like average handling time. I had all these call centers. I had all these supply chain issues. Like availability of stock in stores and stuff like that. You just like it was absolutely full on all the time. So anything that could any technology or change that could help me do that, improve that service to the customer would, I'm right on it. But the number of people, when you're on the other side, I mean, I used to have my PA basically just block. People would be ringing me to try and get through to me all the time. It was like there's a queue. I'm just like block, no block, block, block. Just you know. And then when I was working with USAP, we were on the other side making the calls. So it's funny how you get, when you experience the buyer side of it, about what it's like. So yeah.
I bet you had Post-it notes all over the wall. When am I going to get my Sony Ericsson phones in? When are my Nokias coming in? So yeah, it's.
I remember I had a meeting with Matt. I mean, this is obviously quite a few years ago. Who was the CEO of Nokia UK, right? I met him in Slough Extra. He's quite funny now. So basically, you have all these different fascias where you basically put dummy phones, yeah. And we had these we had basically like in an extra. It's like the retail space is very, very expensive, right? So I said, look, you see these slots here, these 5 slots. They have Nokia labels on, but they have no dummy handsets because we have no stock. Yeah. If we don't get stock in the next few days, there'll be Samsung in those 5 slots.
Yes.
Right? And I'm not threatening you, but that's the problem I've got. I need to improve, profit per square foot, revenue per square foot. You made a CEO. Okay, redivert that stock from Carrefour Warehouse to Tesco immediately. That was the CEO of the UK. I mean, great guy. But this is the thing is, unless you showed the impact to a business leader like that, then they can make an informed decision. Yeah. So fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I think the technology shift is certainly helping people in those jobs now from, planned delivery dates to actual delivery dates. You know exactly when there's a strike in a port or a fire in a warehouse to know that you're going to be 5 days late on a delivery and it's gone from Rotterdam and now it's on its way to Los Angeles or whatever. So, I mean, all of those things we had to do way back at SAP. I remember once being foisted into the boardroom of one of Britain's biggest pharmaceutical companies, and there was the CEO there with his smoked salmon sandwiches and Shabley saying, well, how's SAP going to help me? And you've got to be able to answer that in 30 seconds as to where the buffer is in their supply chain, how you think you can save 10% to the top line and give me a chance to do that. Who do I speak to? And the phone gets picked up straight away to the head of R&D. Meet this chap. So
I think your point a bit earlier as well is actually an interesting observation as well, is that, and that line from the Xerox days, I'm not going to talk about my business until I understand absolutely everything about your business. I think that's a fantastic principle to work from, because I think there's a bit of a rush, I think, sometimes where there's that kind of pressure, especially with the VC community and the VC backed organizations. That you start this customer discovery process, about actually understanding, have you got a fit? Yeah, have you actually can you solve their problems with
Absolutely.
what you have? And I think that there's an over technologification, probably not a word that exists, but you kind of like the bits and the bytes, and sometimes I don't know if you've got the same observation. I think we've maybe touched on this. Is depending on what the heritage of the founder is, of the organisation that's trying to make the offer, then they do have they kind of like lean towards their kind of comfort zone. Yeah. So talking in techno babble sometimes is their comfort zone, or talking in business. And unless you get that, I think what you're saying is, unless you get the right mix, it just goes straight over people's heads and just doesn't land. And they go, what was all that about?
Yeah, it can be. I think it can be quite overwhelming for a technology founder to know that they've created a niche and invented something that's superlative, to then wonder why people don't understand it in their speak. And you don't have to. The great exponents of technology growth companies talk about business outcomes. They don't talk about the bell and the whistle, how fast it goes and whether it's got a stripe, because essentially they all do much the same thing. And so people eventually will buy from the trusted advisor that understands their business and has proven where they can take advantage with the technology. I do love speaking to technology founders that understand the holistic view of that discipline. And, there's a place for sales, there's a place for marketing. It's certainly a fuzzy thing for I'm sure a founder to invent and then find suddenly they're 100 million or 200 million or even larger by size, that they've got to go through that grueling exercise of probably being let down thousands of times before they get it right eventually, and bring in the experienced leadership to help them to scale.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's this kind of fascination with that. You probably heard the phrase founder-led sales.
Yes.
You've probably come across that, and it's and you probably observed it as well, like I have, where they kind of they're kind of on a journey of discovery themselves, and there's also this thing about ego and also how they deal with rejection. So some people deal with no in a different way, don't they? Some people just like water for ducks back, move on, next action, whereas some people take it very differently. So it's maybe there's an opportunity there, Brian. You should set up the Brian Mort Academy.
For doing what, Andrew? Getting people to say yes.
Well, no, yeah. Well, there's that. There's also that thing about. Well, I suppose there's a book about that, Getting to Yes, isn't there? But it's a bit. I suppose you just our conversation already just made me think about the stuff that you did at Xerox and the stuff that where you go through that sales career. Actually, there's a really valuable reality check of a journey of getting founders to go through that learning process. And I know sometimes you've got to learn on the job as well, but maybe there's an idea there.
I think we're all cut from different cloth, right? And I don't expect to understand the brilliance of a technology founder, nor do I expect them to truly understand how to scale a business and turn it into hundreds of millions. So as long as the two can coexist, which they do in successful companies, then it's totally fine. Going to Waldorf to have Hasso Plattner at the time scrutinize your deals was always a bit unnerving, because if he didn't think you knew what you were talking about, his tie would be out of place and his hair on end, and he'd scream at you. Luckily, it didn't happen to me, but you had to really be on your game to show that you understood the technology side, but how that appertained to the solution you're trying to make. So I think for founders, I would say, and it's really tough being an entrepreneur, right? I'm married to an entrepreneur, and that journey can be a rocky road. It's like the iceberg. You can see the bit above water, but all of that pain and sufferance underneath can take years. And people don't realize that when they've got a great job or a monthly salary. So my hat goes off to entrepreneurs that have got the bravery to do that, and you've got to be resilient, and you've got to be ready to take on the world and have that belief system to get through that crossing the chasm, as the book talks about. So I think once that happens and you can scale a business, it's then about almost freeing up and being good at what you do in an ambassadorial sense, and then bringing on the experts to build your business for you, whether it's in another geography, whether it's in another discipline. The CEO's best friends are usually the CFO, the head of HR, the head of legal, and the head of sales. Those are the four pillars of building a great company. You don't need any more reports than that if you're a CEO. And your first line of management under that are critical to extolling the virtues of what your company does in a unique way. And once you build on, like SAP did, we keep going back to them, but when you dominate an industry space, we see them plastered all over the airports of the world. So and so run by SAP, or an Oracle. 9 out of 10 pharmaceuticals run Oracle. This is great marketing, and it makes you want to buy the product and be like other players in the market to improve your business. So I think for founders, whether they're a £1 million business or 100 million, it's all about knowing where you are in the scale of your journey and what you need. And that takes different kinds of employees, from your founding pioneers, your employee, your first 10 people, to the 100th person that you employ to run the Americas, for instance. So it's, I would say get advice, get a mentor, get somebody that, you can have a cup of tea or a gin and tonic with, as this series is called. And that's the best way, really. So you can bounce, because it's an unfriendly place to be when you're an entrepreneur. You're sort of there in your four walls with your own thoughts on usually the insecurities of how to grow and how to build capital into your business to go to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, if you think about, in those kind of ways, we lived through the dot-com boom and bust, yeah? And obviously a number of big companies came out of the back of that, Google, yeah, all those usual suspects, yeah. the FANG companies. I suppose the thing is for the future now, I suppose, is that, with this whole agents and this new, as you're saying, throwing the software, out of the bath or whatever, or you're throwing it up in the air again and then trying to work out how you catch the jigsaw puzzle pieces. I suppose the question for me, just thinking when you were just talking, was, is it going to create a new wave? Are we going to see a new wave of companies? Because, you think about now the number of technology companies and founders that we've got today in 2025, I haven't looked at the stats, but, if you compare that to 2005, it must be like, hugely different. The whole, people come out of their, they do their PhD, they come out of the university, do their PhD, and then maybe found a company. They don't even go into a company before they found a company. They go straight from academia into founding a company. So that the trajectory and the path is different, and it's kind of the proliferation then of the number of startups that are out there is also making it a lot bigger. And I don't know. I don't know if do you sense there's going to be like a new wave? I'm not saying it's open AI, but it's like this new wave of companies that are going to shake even FANG. They're going to shake Meta up, they're going to shake Google up, etc., etc. And then what's the next S curve?
I think we're already seeing it. I think we're seeing companies that are being formed using technology, whether it's writing a technology code or understanding a new industry from scratch. I think you can do it now. The access is there. I don't use the mainstream search engines anymore. I use, an agent, and it's really fast. It's 99% accurate, and it needs dotting the I's and crossing the T's to the human form of how you would want to read something in a personal way. But that takes away hours and hours and sometimes weeks of research, for instance. So I've seen companies build from scratch using agents that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do unless you came out with an engineering degree or you were a coder. So don't ask me what the future is for humans, because cutting the grass is one thing, being a gardener, but there's robots can do that now. So what does the future hold for us? Well, I think we need to really be very tech savvy. I think if you're an artist or a poet or a Savile Taylor, there's still going to be the human element of making a great outcome for what is your profession. But for the human workforce of the future, I think it's going to be in the loop with automation. There's less babies, there seems to be, in the world than 5 or 10 years ago. We were part of the baby boomer brigade. I don't see many prams going along the high street anymore. So quite what the population will be in 20 or 30 years' time, who knows? But I think it's definitely going to be a corporation.
It'd be robots just pushing robots along.
Yeah, there you go. So, we're definitely going to be in a workplace that has automation and agents alongside us to help us do our jobs. And we will be the intervention and the supervisor of that. So that, the professions will still be out there. But I think you need to be extremely savvy. You always need to be learning, unlike many years ago when we went on a 2-week training course. You have to learn every day now to stay ahead just by one page. It's that dynamic a marketplace.
So, I mean, so that links to an interesting question about what are the roles that are going to exist in the future? What are the skills that people need to consider to have? And how does things like sales, how does that sales skills fit into that? Do you think there's still a future for sales skills?
What a question. We grew up with the best exponents of the art that I've ever seen because they were trained, because they worked around a peer group that were also excellent. So the competitive nature of wanting to be better than the next person was always there. And you learned from each other. Now we have hybrid working and people working from home. So who's talking to who and who's working across the desk with, back in my day, it was with a calculator. How did you do that? How did you do that proposal? And what did you say? And can I come with you on that call? Is not so much done as it used to be. I'd like to see more companies bring in young talent, train them up, find out what they're really good at, what their passion will be, and really invest in them. Because if you take them at a very young age, from university, let's say, and train them through and give them that dynamic roadmap in their career. We had a few in my last company, and they're all now in their 30s, and some of them are doing extremely well. They learn all the habits, good or bad, from us, and they learned bravery and belief and the ability to kick down doors,
resilience,
all of that, and so they struck their stuff now, and that's giving back. I love that, to see that. I had lunch the other day with one of those very people that work for me, and he was worldwide top salesman in his company last year. So it's tremendous, isn't it, to see that level.
He's come out of the Brian Mort Academy. See, that's what it is.
I don't know. The
BMAs.
never take no for an answer was what we were taught. Keep banging on the doors. So yeah, I think we have to commit to train and learn like never before. Certainly, I do.
But what I noticed though was that I know some companies have been making announcements about they're not going to hire entry level people anymore. They're cutting from the top, it's the overheads, and they're cutting from the bottom as well. So maybe if that's the case, that what's the organisation future going to look like? Because then if you've got no talent coming through and being progressed, like you just said, which I agree with, it's like what seems like a bit of a strange organisation you'd be working.
It's a pity if that happens, and we do hear of that, intake being reduced or not happening this year, and you've got guys and girls coming out of university, they've got their degree, they've spent their time to learn their discipline, and they want a new role, they want an apprenticeship, shall we say. And we had it when we were growing up and coming out into the world. People took a chance on us. And I think that the future of a great workforce is to have that diversity of age. You need the experience, but you need the newcomers that are going to soak it up like a sponge. And it keeps you, really dynamic, and it keeps you young, Andrew. Look, I mean, we've been around a few years now, and we need the youngsters around us.
Speak for yourself. I'm still in the press ups every day.
There you go. I use the sauna a lot.
Where's Brian? He's in the sauna.
Yes.
No, I agree. I mean, what you're saying is because actually the younger generations are going to ask those those questions that are going to probably raise a few eyebrows, but they're going to keep that dynamic out. Because they're going to be curious. Yeah, they're going to want to know, they want to learn. So there's nothing
you need that
thing about.
We learned from great people when we were growing up in organisations, and they could almost command one night at the London Palladium. Some of them, they were just majestic at the art form, and it is an art form, selling, if that's what we're talking about now. It's not a science. It's an intuition in many ways. You've got to understand your fellow human, your customer. I always remember growing up, my dad was a Savile Row tailor, so in the summer holidays I'd go in the shop and watch him.
You work in Savile Row? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'd watch him, command 4 or 5 customers and put on the show. I'll be with you in a moment, sir. Don't worry. And we'd have some notable customers come into the shop, and it's quite an art form. And I think selling is like that as well. You've got to command your audience. You've got to know what you're talking about. You've got to find out what the customer wants, and you've got to be able to articulate then, what you think they might need.
You just made me think just quite cheekily about that Paul Whitehouse kind of suits you, sir. Yes, suits you.
It's a little bit like that.
No, but to your point, actually, if you're in a shop and you're dealing with 5 high net worth customers, in a Savile Row, that's quite an achievement to pull that off, isn't it? that is mega.
Tommy Cooper was his customer, the great
comedian. Oh, really?
Was
he? Fantastic.
He would come in, and I always remember my dad sort of saying, "How can we help you today, sir?" He said, "I need some socks." "What size?" And he'd lift his leg up and say, "Extra large." So you've got to deal with all kinds of customers, and it's the same in the technology industry. You're going to have some open customers, some funny customers, some grumpy ones, some closed ones. You've got to be able to work around the human psyche to be able to get them on your side, and that comes from persistence. It comes from being the person that can add value to what they're doing. Right, so I'll get Hasso in to see you, or whoever your CEO is, and we'll talk through this. So you've got to be the person that can orchestrate. You can't necessarily play the big bass drum, but you can certainly be the great conductor, and that's what sales is all about, really. You're not an artist of being able to play an instrument, but you're a fantastic orchestrated person that can bring in the expertise to make the great sound that the customer's looking for. So it's great to have had training like that. I still love to see the young workforce coming through and learning and soaking it up and applying that to the way they do business. Because when you look at how they prepare for a call or prepare for an account, the good ones have really done the homework. They understand the customer, the C-suite, who they're trying to get to, which partners that will be the ones to influence them to get there. And then once you get there, what do you say? It's a bit like that lift analogy. If you're at the bottom of the lift on the ground floor and it's a 30 floors, by the time you get to the top, have you caught the attention? Are you going to get the next appointment?
Well, it's also when you like back to our boardroom discussion when back in GEC Alston days, one of the things that I really enjoyed in that meeting was you've also got to have the mindset that it's not a hierarchy, right? So it's like actually you're engaging with these managing directors who were hairy ass managing directors, running big businesses. But they were running it on what? Remember that thing where they were running the whole thing on one piece of paper? Remember that?
Yes.
Like one piece of paper, and like they knew the numbers inside out. But actually, just being humble and authentic, and pretty direct with them. that's why we won them over. We won their hearts and minds, because we showed that we actually were on it, yeah, and we understood what they were trying to do.
Well, so also having the bravery to ask the reason why they did it like that as well. You've got to be able to challenge in a situation, say, well, how are you doing it and why are you doing it like that? And have you thought about this outcome? And I think if you're well rehearsed and you're inside the psyche of their business challenge, you can go in and articulate, So we had a young salesperson in my last company, and he was a professional golfer, and he injured himself. He'd won a competition, but he'd injured himself to the point where he couldn't play at that level anymore, although I have since played with him, and he still shoots 4 or 5 under par. So don't quite know what the difference is there.
Is this when his arm tied behind his back, he can still get a hole in one?
Yeah, nearly. He still had both of his hands, but he'd actually cut one of his fingers. And we asked him in the interview, why do you want to come into sales? And he said, because I like winning. And we thought, well, that'll do for us. Because he had the belief of wanting to put the blinkers on and win. And he was a tremendous researcher of his customer. He was young. He was in his late 20s. He's probably early 30s by now. But he had a great mannerism to be able to go in front of a board member, as grisly as they might have been, and speak to them on the level and be very engaging. And I think that, it's not an age thing. It's a fear thing. If you feel like you belong, then you do.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, that's some really good stories there. Really good stories. I mean, so in terms of the, what's different, what's the same, and I mean, for people that are listening to this episode today that are trying to work out in 2025, in what way sales different, and what way sales the same. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, you're going to really get me started. We grew up in an era that didn't have, a CRM system. It was an Excel. And can you believe I was never asked to forecast at SAP, but to be between 200 and 500% of target without ever being asked was something that doesn't happen anymore, right? I think almost, the CRM, whilst we as leaders need to know what our rolling forecast looks like in terms of where it is in the pipeline, in terms of maturity, will it close this month, this quarter, next quarter, is absolutely critical, because when you go to the board, you've got to be able to articulate that message. But it has become a paint by numbers that arguably gets into the wrong hands, that doesn't allow people to really show their own flair and design. Now, you've got to, first of all, prove that you can run a sales campaign and manage it and corral your people into that account. But on the other hand, if you're going to be asked every week, what's changed and have you put this into the system, and when you spoke to Billy or Susie, have you put that letter in, and so on and so forth, you're killing what is an art form. And for the great deal makers of this world, I doubt if any of them really want to enter anything into a system. They want to stand in front of the customer and they want to articulate and explore and be childlike almost in asking why something gets done in a certain way, and then prove how that can be done better. And it's not a computer system that allows you to do that. So there's a place for it and leaders need it. But I kind of feel a little bit sorry for the sales people of this era, because they're not learning. They're not getting value added to their art form.
Well, it's like stifling creativity.
Yes.
Interesting.
It's a bit like, when you're at school and you were told, you've got to write this essay in this time period. Some people could do it and other people needed more time. And I think that it's a little bit like that in the sense that if you're going to battery hen everybody in the same way, you're not going to get very nice eggs coming out at the end of it. And we're seeing a dumbing down of enterprise class selling skills. It's very easy for me to say this because I enjoyed working in an era when you had great people around you that helped you towards that sale, but you were orchestrating it and you weren't getting pestered every 5 minutes because the pressure's on for companies, especially if they're public market company, quarterly results, and so on. How do you measure success?
Or VC backed or private equity backed.
VC backed, how do you measure somebody's success? I remember a salesperson once joined a company and he didn't sell anything for the first 12 months and everyone was vying for, a sacking. But in month 15, they brought in 400% of their target.
Is that the same person that I know as well?
Yes, you'll know who that
is. MS.
Yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. That same day they all dropped, didn't they?
That same month. And it was all very well for us, winning presidents' clubs and doing our targets, and then suddenly seeing this person that done nothing do something great. Now that's missing in today's enterprise because people don't get that long to germinate and build. But I think that if you're in professional sales at the top level, you need to have the bandwidth to be able to have the roaming license to go out and build an enterprise solution. And that comes back to training. If people are trained well and they've got the trust of the organization, then you would have a band of operator that can work at that level. It could take 2 years to make a sale, but they'll make the sale, and those kind of skills and the kind of people that can do them. So it's really a trade-off.
But do you think it's an epidemic of the capital that's been put in some of these companies, and then the expectations of return and the expectations of growth? When we were working together in that prior businesses, it was an organically, it's got your own balance sheet. It was actually funded its own self, but there wasn't that kind of frenetic, like what's he called it? That thirst for growth, growth at any cost. That kind of mentality, and that actually then doesn't it give you, the pressure on the runway, the pressure on delivering results in a certain time frame, the sometimes unreasonability of the complexity of go-to-market. If you compare go-to-market then, go-to-market now, it's all gone digital, but it's a lot more complicated, yeah. And obviously, people are getting, buyers are getting, what do you call it? Buyers are getting approached by in multiple different channels. It's it's quite a melting pot of complexity now. If I would analogize it,
you got to know what you're cooking in the oven, right? And it depends on the go-to-market and the classic pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, you've got your global accounts, and then the middle layer is your national or major accounts, and the bottom you've got your reseller distribution accounts. So once you've mapped out a coverage model and the buying patterns and decisions that will be made, you then focus your talent accordingly to that pyramid. And I think sometimes quarterly pressure gets in the way of opening the oven door too quickly, and the souffle will not rise, right? Is it going to be a $1 million sale, or could it have been a $20 million sale? At some point, you've got to take money off the table, like all of the great software companies taught us to do. So it's not like you're not pressing the metal to the floor and you're being aggressive in your cycles to try and win. But if you're premature in proving out a solution to a customer, then that's the difference between 1 or 20 million. And that's where the impatience lies.
You can unpick all the good work you've done already, can't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can lose credibility as well. You can look an absolute fool in front of the C-suite if you're saying it's the end of our quarter and can we give you a bit of discount? You're going to look like an absolute muppet. So, as a great, it's down to leadership as well, and it's the way in which the C-suite of these companies design the culture, right? You want to perform, you want to grow, but you don't want to torch, the earth that you have. And so you have to teach your people to be brave enough to say, it's not going to come this quarter, and these are the reasons why. And this is what we got to do to grow it and close it. And a CRM system doesn't tell you that. And so it gets into the wrong hands, and then it forces the sales team to do something unnatural, and that therein lies, eating and cannibalizing your own pipeline, really. Now, I'm not saying I disagree with CRM. I use it in my business. I've used it all throughout the 2000s. But you've got to be.
It's not in isolation. It can be a blunt.
You've got to have
It can be a blunt instrument. That's what you say.
Yeah, you've got to have an expert eye for what you're cooking.
No, I love the souffle analogy. It's a good one.
Be like my cooking.
Yeah. Is it burnt?
Yes.
I think we should have taken it out a while ago, Brian. But,
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, no, I was just going to say, it's amazing how time flies, and when you're having fun, and at this rate, I'll be inviting you back for. There's only other two other people in the whole world that I've actually invited back twice, but I'm extending an invitation for the future for doing the part 2.
Well, that's very kind of you. Next time we should have a gin and tonic rather than a cup of tea, right? It's
exactly. Next time I will get a studio in London, and we'll do it in a studio in London with a G&T on.
Fabulous, fabulous, Andrew. Well, look, thank you for inviting me on your show, and hope it doesn't turn out to be that we've been talking gibberish for, what is it now, 90 minutes. I've enjoyed it tremendously, not just looking back on the past, but looking to the future and what that means for a workforce in our industry, what it means for our customers. It's something that I hold dear, and I think I've become a student over the years of being quite nonchalant about it when I was younger to now being quite fastidious, to have that yearning for learning, as somebody quoted once, that I never had when I was younger. And I do it now, and technology is the one thing that's got me there to do it every day. Whether I'm reading a McKinsey report or an Accenture report or whatever it might be, it helps you. And so I think for your listeners, and especially the younger ones trying to crack on in the industry, it's like, have a yearning for learning, and copy the ones that really do well. Back to my early days, you found the ones that won President's Club, and you hung around their desk and you asked them questions and say, how did you do it?
What's the secret sauce?
Yeah. Yes.
That's fantastic. So that was Brian Mort. And I suppose if anybody wants to contact you or know more about what you're working on these days, what's the best way of finding you on the Tinternet?
So I run my own strategy business now with my partner. It's a company called Mission Intelligence. So you'll find that missionintelligence.ai as the internet string, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Brian Mort. I can't think of any other way, Andrew. That's probably the best 2 ways to find me quickly.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, we'll publish those links when we publish the episode. But yeah, no, absolute pleasure to spend time with you today, and thanks for the time, and thanks for being on the show. Fantastic.
You too. Have fun.
That was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast, with Mr. Brian Mort.